Welcome to the May 1st, 2012 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It's my privilege to call this meeting to order. There, at one time, were agendas on both sides of the room. I think that side is out. And for those of you who are listening to this by podcast, I have no idea what I'm pointing to. But on the other side of the room, I think there are still some agendas available. So please pick one up and feel free to follow along with us tonight. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment on both items on our agenda as well as a section of our agenda for public comment on matters of a general nature. It is customary that we begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, and tonight we have some special guests from Scout Troop 55 who are going to come on up here, whether they like it or not, and help lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So come on up,
Don't be bashful.
Yeah.
You're on live TV.
The protocol is to stand anywhere. You don't have to come all the way up, wherever you're comfortable. Flag's right here. We're going to turn around and you guys can kick us off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Scouts. Appreciate that very much. Now, of course, we always try to return the favor, and for having put you through that, and thank you for that wonderful job. Any questions that any of our scout troops, any of our scouts have for any members of the Village Council? No obligation, but if anybody has a question, I'll make sure that Commissioner Durkin answers it. All right, no questions. All right, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. All right, then, at this point in time, I ask our fine village clerk to please call the roll.
Yes. Commissioner Rankin? Here. Commissioner Barnett? Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner Schnell?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 3 in our agenda, which pertains to the approval of minutes from prior council meetings, and we have 2 sets of minutes on the agenda tonight. One set are executive session minutes for approval only from, actually 2 sets of executive session minutes from April 3rd and April 10th, and also regular council meeting minutes from April 17th, 2012. Are there any changes, corrections, or comments from any members of the council with respect to any of these minutes? Hearing none. Motion to approve, please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are approved unanimously. That brings us to item 4 on tonight's agenda, which is the promised segment for public comment on items of a general nature. This is a session where any residents who have any questions or comments with respect to any items that are not on our agenda tonight, any matters of a general nature, please come down to the podium, and the custom is to give your name and address, and we would love to hear from you. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council, staff, fellow citizens. I have a question regarding the last village council meeting, and I'll quote from the, first of all, let me preface my remarks and comments by saying I'm not an accountant. But I'll quote from the official minutes of the last meeting. In a response to Commissioner Waldeck, Mr. Freeman replied that Alan Ambrose and Chris Shear from Northern Trust were present to provide additional information. Mr. Shear said that they conducted a $35 million competitive bid process today and received 7 bids. The interest rate is 3.38%, and they feel these are outstanding rates, and some of the commissioners echoed that feeling. Elsewhere in the supporting documentation for that ordinance passing the bonds, authorizing the bonds, the following is from the village website. On April 17, 2012, the village received the bids for the $35 million of general obligation bond issuance. A total of 8 bids were received. Bank of America Lynch was the lowest bidder at the following interest rates. Road construction, $25 million, 3.487%. Water system improvements, $10 million, 3.101%. Question is, why the difference in the 2 statements? And if it's one bond issue, how did we get 2 different interest rates?
I think Village Manager Fieldman is anxious to answer that question.
First, we'll double check on how many bidders there were. We'll get whether it was 8 or 7. Mr. LaCrona, we'll get back to you on that just to keep that consistent. These are actually 2 different bond issuances with 2 different terms. The road construction, I believe, had a longer term than that would be the $25 million, and the $10 million, I believe, had a shorter term, which is why you get different interest rates. And Mr. Shee reported the combined interest rates on 35, but technically speaking, there are actually 2 different bond issuances. with two different revenue sources from two different funds.
I see. Okay.
Does that help, Mr. LeCrun?
Right, but doesn't that, didn't Commissioner Waldeck got his split that he was always talking about?
No, Commissioner Waldeck was looking for a split in terms of, I believe, the vote.
The 10 and the 25.
Correct. Not on the interest rates.
Right.
They were always two different bond issuances. I believe, if I'm correct, it was a request to split them up in terms of approval.
Right,
And
thank
they
you.
were the same, they were under one ordinance, which is why they couldn't.
Correct. They were under, Commissioner Chanel is correct, they were both packaged together under a single ordinance and
Correct.
would have created administrative headaches to separate them. Any other questions or comments of a general nature from any members of the audience? Hearing none, we'll move to item 5. We actually have a public hearing tonight, and it's on a very exciting topic, electrical aggregation, which should be of interest to all residents of Downers Grove. I would like to call this public hearing to order. This public hearing has been called by the Village Council pursuant to the Illinois Power Agency Act to consider the proposed electric aggregation plan of operation and governance for an electrical aggregation program of the Village of Downers Grove. Notice of this hearing was published in the Downers Grove Reporter, and a copy of the notice and the proof of publication have been presented and are made a part of the official record of this hearing. I would like to summarize the procedures which we will follow for tonight's public hearing. First, I will ask the village manager to summarize the proposed electric aggregation plan of operation and governance program. Second, I will then ask if any member of the village council wishes to make a statement or ask a question. Third, there will be an opportunity for members of the public to make statements or comments or to submit written statements or comments for the record. Fourth, I will again ask if any member of the village council wishes to make a statement or ask a question. Fifth, and finally, thereafter, the hearing will be adjourned. At this hearing, witnesses will not be sworn, and a verbatim written transcript of the statements or testimony given at the hearing will not be prepared. So if you were worried about that, don't worry about it. However, a recording of the procedures will be made on village equipment and retained until minutes of the hearing have been prepared and approved by the village council. So with that, we'll move to the next item, which is a summary by the village manager of the proposed electric aggregation plan of operation and governance program. Mr. Fieldman.
Thank you. And I will call on Allison Deitch, management analyst, who's been the project manager on the aggregation project, and she will actually present the information on the plan of governance.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. As part of our aggregation process, we are required to hold 2 public hearings on our plan of operation and governance. Tonight, as part of the public hearing, I'll provide a brief summary of the plan's key points. We'll also provide an update on the process, including a partnership opportunity that we are proposing, and an update on the schedule for the remainder of the process. Here's what I will be discussing tonight. I'll begin with a brief refresher on the aggregation program. Municipal aggregation is a program that allows municipalities to arrange for lower electricity supply rates on behalf of their residents. Because electricity is a deregulated utility, ComEd customers are free to purchase the supply of electricity from an alternative supplier. The supply component is approximately 60% of the average customer's bill. In an aggregation program, the municipality uses the economy of scale to seek an even lower price than the individual could arrange in the market. The village received authorization to implement an aggregation program through the March 20th referendum. We will seek competitive pricing for electricity supply. While ComEd will still be responsible for distribution, Downers Grove residents and eligible small businesses will pay lower electricity bills. It's important to note that any customer that does not wish to be included in this program will have the opportunity to opt out before the new contract goes into effect. Here's where we are in the process. The process of aggregation has 4 general steps, and we are at step number 2. We've passed the referendum, and tonight we're holding the first public hearing on the plan of governance. First, I will provide a summary. Plan of governance is required under state law. Our plan reflects the feedback we received from the community during the education process for the referendum, as well as what we found were best practices and lessons learned from other communities that have implemented aggregation programs. Among other things, the plan of governance describes the requirements that eligible suppliers will have to agree to meet in order to be considered for the contract. This plan ensures that suppliers know upfront the conditions of supplying electricity to our residents, Additionally, this plan allows us to set conditions that will protect our residents and ensure a transparent and effective opt-out process. It also describes the eligible categories of customers. For example, we expressly identify those who cannot be included in the program and those who will not be included because they would not see savings. The next few slides will provide a summary of the key points of the plan. The same summary, along with a complete copy of the plan, is available on our website. First, we plan to use an RFP process that includes pre-qualifying potential suppliers. This means that we will review their qualifications to ensure that they are certified by the Illinois Commerce Commission to serve residential accounts. In addition, we will make sure that they agree to all other requirements described in the plan. The first contract would be for a period of 1 year with an option to renew if the supplier can continue to beat the comparable ComEd rate. Additionally, if at any time ComEd's rate were to fall below our rate, we could terminate the contract if the supplier could not beat ComEd. And finally, our plan requires an opt-out process of at least 2 weeks. There are some groups that are ineligible for participation because we cannot legally include them or because we cannot guarantee savings over their current rate. ComEd actually provides us with this list of eligible customers. So these customers in these groups do not need to affirmatively opt out of our program. Plan of governance describes the increments of renewable energy that the village will review. From the state requirement, which is currently 6% for the period from June until May of next year, up to an increment of 100%. In short, renewable energy does not mean that the electricity that we use is necessarily of renewable sources, but it does mean that the equivalent amount of renewable energy would be supplied to the energy grid. I'll use a short example. It's similar to filling a bathtub with several different faucets. When we drain the bathtub, we don't know necessarily which faucet provided the water we're draining, but we do know that one of those faucets had renewable energy flowing out of it. And then finally, if a resident were to inadvertently opt out of the program, they would have 60 days to re-enroll in the program at the same rate as everyone else. Finally, we've set requirements that will prevent the supplier from charging residents or businesses if they move out of the village or if they move to a different home within the village. If you were to move out of the village, you would not be charged any termination fee. If you move within the village, you could keep the same terms that everyone else in the village has. However, a resident who chose to switch to a different alternative supplier in the middle of our contract might be charged a termination fee, which would be described in the supplier's contract. That's the summary of the plan of governance, so I will move on to an update on our aggregation process as well as a timeline for moving forward from here. First, we've identified a partnership opportunity with the Village of Westmont that allows us to form a larger buying group. Tonight on the consent agenda, the Council is considering an intergovernmental agreement to pursue a joint RFP and contracting process with the Village of Westmont. As proposed in the agreement, we will have the opportunity to use Westmont's consultant for aggregation, named Belden Energy Solution. This consultant would help both communities by preparing the RFP, advising the villages on the requirements for suppliers, and finally negotiating the contract with the supplier. The cost of the consultant would be included in the rate and approximately 60 cents per residential or commercial account per year. After the Village Council approves the plan of governance and adopts an ordinance authorizing aggregation, we would issue the RFP to suppliers. And this slide talks a little bit about what we would ask for in the RFP. We will ask suppliers to provide us with a proposal, including their qualifications and preliminary pricing. Using those proposals, we will ask the Village Council to authorize a list of qualified suppliers, as well as to give the village manager the authority to authorize the contract with the lowest bidder from among those qualified suppliers. This process would ensure that we choose the lowest bid from among a list of qualified suppliers. Finally, here's our timeline for moving forward. Tonight, we're holding our first public hearing and asking for the community's input on the plan of governance. The second public hearing will be held on May 15th, the same night that the council will be asked to adopt the plan of governance and authorize the aggregation program. Then we would move on to the RFP process. After the council authorizes the plan of governance, we would immediately publish the request for proposals. Then, after we receive the proposals from the suppliers, the council would be asked to approve a pre-qualified list on June 5th. That night, given that we would have preliminary pricing, we will ask the council to select the renewable energy mix as well. And then finally, during the month of June, our consultant would help us to determine the best date for asking for final pricing from suppliers. The village manager would then be authorized to award the contract to the lowest bidder based on council-approved parameters. And then finally, we would arrive at the opt-out and the switchover process. We would anticipate that this contract would begin in late July or early August. That's all for the timeline and the information on the public hearing. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Take it then, that brings us to the second step, or the next step, which would be questions or comments from the village council. Any questions or comments on the electrical aggregation plan of operation and governance from members of the village council? Commissioner Schnell.
I actually have two, and I don't know whether you can answer them, Allison, or you can get me the answers. As far as the termination fee is concerned, whether or not there would be a termination fee, is that part of the RFP process so we would know whether or not? You're shaking your head, so yes, it is.
The answer is yes. We would be able to determine whether there will be a termination fee during the selection process.
So from each of the bidders, or would a bidder then, as part of his answering the RFP, put that as one of his conditions? How does that work? I guess for our residents to understand it.
We could do it either way. We could specify the termination fee we want in the contract, and then in theory the pricing would vary based on the risk and recovery of people terminating the contract. Or we could say we would like to see a termination fee in the response, and they could propose the termination fee.
I think we just need, whatever it is and however it works, I think we need to publicize it so that people understand that if they opt in, or if they decide not to opt out, get in the program, and then decide to terminate it, that there'll be a fees associated with this. I think we just need to be very upfront with people so that they understand that, and that that's part of the educational process that will go on.
We will do that.
Yes, there are going to be lots of parallels for education this year, what with electrical aggregation and also the stormwater utility. I think there'll be lots of opportunities to do virtual and real town hall meetings on this topic. A lot of outreach, so definitely.
My only concern is that people, I know that among some people this is kind of a, controversial topic, and I don't want there to be hidden things in there that people will say, well, of course the village didn't tell me about this. So I want just to make sure everything's out there, everybody understands it, and if someone decides to opt out and there's some sort of fee associated with it, it isn't like, well, they never told me, I think. So I just want to be careful. And then if we can go to your little target date, on June the 5th, you talk about the fact that the council is going to approve the qualified electrical suppliers, and then in June, you'll go out with the RFP, get the bids, and then the manager has the authority to decide which one. Under the normal RFP process, most of the RFPs that we do, they're opened up, staff looks at them, and then they're put on a consent agenda for approval. Are we going to do that, or are we just going to approve the qualified list and then the manager is going to pick the final winner?
You would pick the pre-qualified list of people who would actually submit the bid and give me the parameters under which I could approve a contract, which would, of course, reflect the plan of governance and the lowest overall cost.
So it would be a lot like the parameters ordinances that we do for bond issuances.
Okay. Exactly. Now, the reason behind this is when we partner with Westmont to get the bigger electrical load and more savings, there are two village councils that would have to approve it if we did it the traditional way, and that would actually end up costing us more because we would actually have to hold pricing on two different nights. So we think we can get the lowest price and council direction by using this parameters approach.
But if we decide, if during this process it's decided that we would not get a lower price, if we go in with the Village of Westmont, that would still remain the same?
That is correct. One of the great benefits of partnering with the Village of Westmont is that we retain total decision-making autonomy. And we will also know through the preliminary pricing how the electrical suppliers view our electrical loads for Downers Grove and Westmont, and whether it is truly to our benefit to partner under one contract or if we're better off on our own. And we will know that through the preliminary pricing. So by the time you get to June 5th, you will know whether we'll be going out as a partner with Westmont or if we should proceed independently and why and how that will drive the lowest cost.
And then, I don't mean to monopolize this, but then, once the decision is made as to who the actual supplier will be, there'll be notification done in a village council meeting?
Yes.
Obviously to us, but to our residents, so they understand who's going to be supplying it, what the fees are, et cetera, et cetera. So it's
That is correct.
similar, as you said, to a bond. It's just after Mr. LeCren's topic of, there's different numbers. I think, again, we just need to be very clear for our residents as to what they're getting, how much it's going to cost, and where it's going.
There will be an opportunity for an extensive education and public information process prior to and including the opt-out process. Basically, every eligible customer is going to get contacted by the supplier that we award it to and ask them to opt in or opt out, or excuse me, ask them if they want to opt out. And we will have information about that well in advance of before they receive that card.
Okay, so not only on the webpage, but in other areas or other arenas too, for those
Yes.
people who don't have access to a web.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Right, and I think it will be important to pre-announce that, because in this day and age, a lot of us receive phone calls from telemarketers and spam emails, and if they're not anticipating or recognizing the source of that communication, they'll probably ignore it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Rankin.
I just have a few questions. You had explained this to me earlier, Dave, but I think it would be important for everyone to hear. Westmont and the Village of Downers Grove can make two entirely different choices about their power mix and the price and all of that. Just because we're going to bid together doesn't tie us to Westmont.
That is correct. We are only tied to Westmont on the sides that benefit us, like sharing the cost of consultants and getting the benefit of a larger load going to bid, electrical load. But both municipalities maintain complete decision-making authority and autonomy. So once we get information back, especially after the preliminary pricing is available, we can decide what's best for both communities and act independently.
Okay. And then the other thing is, if one of our residents doesn't appreciate the power mix that we select, they can always opt out of the program and select any company and buy any amount of renewable energy that they see fit, right?
That is correct. They could choose to do it through an opt-out and just choose the green energy supplier or whatever mix they want through the opt-out process. And in addition to that, they could actually go on the open market and buy an item called the renewable energy credit, whether they participate in our program or not. So there's really two options for each individual resident to select their green energy mix.
Okay, and then the last question I had was that the village is not receiving any revenue benefits from doing this. We're just doing this on behalf of the residents. Is it
Absolutely not.
This is all for the benefit of the residents, and the village has no gain except to extend those rates to our
Correct.
residents.
The rate is, the billing would be directly from ComEd to the residents, and the supply is the rate that they're being charged.
This is all in goodwill.
That is correct. We do not get any money from
Right,
this.
just to pick up on that, what Commissioner Rankin's referring to is in some communities, when they've gone the electrical aggregation route, the community sponsoring the program that goes out to bid on behalf of the residents will take part of the savings that's generated from going to a different supplier and direct that revenue stream from that portion of the savings to something. We are not doing that at this time.
Correct.
It's not contemplated as part of this proposal. But in some places, they have done that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that clear.
Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was in Springfield last week and I had an opportunity to talk to an individual from Commonwealth Edison. and while I was down there, and they had mentioned to me when we were talking about tonight's proposed discussion that's taking place now, is that this basically is an 18-month period that we're going to be able to see a savings before they start adjusting their rates and their contracts with purchases of power. So in the long run, we're only talking really 18 months of a savings, and I'm sure the greater part of the savings is going to be early on, probably within the next 12 months versus the full 18, but the aggregate, I'm sure the savings will be, overall, the 18 will be fine, but I think that's the key element that, there's a lot of work, in my opinion, as I look at it now, that we've done and will do for an 18-month savings, so.
That's correct, and the reason for that is because ComEd's contract for their electrical supply will come due, and they will have the opportunity to rebid in this environment.
Correct. That's all I have, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Neustadt?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick point. There is no penalty or fee for opting out of the program?
Absolutely not. There's no penalty for that. It is only, the fee would only come into play if you did not opt out and later decided to drop out of the program, but there's no fee other than a lower rate. There's no benefit.
Thank you.
To pick up on Commissioner Neustadt's question, if, for example, we were to agree to an initial 18-month term with supplier X, and a resident were to not opt out and therefore would be part of the program, at the expiration of that 18-month term, would there then be another option to opt out, or is this, you're in for the long haul as long as we have a contract with somebody?
When the contract terminates, residents would have an opportunity to, again, opt out and choose a different supplier without penalty.
So even if you don't opt out and you realize 12 months down the road, oh gosh, I, for whatever reason, would want to opt out, you could just simply wait another 6 months and then opt out and not pay any penalties. So, which is another important thing to understand, is that if you just wait long enough, you can opt out without a penalty. I think that's probably important to understand too. People may want to opt out for a whole host of reasons. So this is just another option. And one thing I like about this whole topic is options, options, options. It's very nice to have options. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Just jumping the gun here, after the 18 months, could we go do this again and go through bidding and all that again?
Yes, we can.
Without referendum and et cetera, et cetera?
Without referendum,
Okay.
and if there's any updates to our plan of governance, we could make them then. But basically, once the authority rests with us, we can continue to do it.
This is very much like buying a CD. You shop around for a good rate, you figure out what your term is, you're locked in for that term, and then when the term expires, you can start all over again. If you break it early, you pay some kind of a penalty, but if you ride it out, then you're back in the market to do whatever you want.
And then just a suggestion, with all the mail and things that go out to all the residents, you see terms like electrical aggregation, and the eyes start waving, and they go, I'm really not interested in aggregation. Could we make it more pedestrian and call it electrical choice or something? I know we have statutory requirements, but maybe if we can kind of make it a little bit more pedestrian so that people are more willing to open and read their mail.
We will do so. We will use plain understandable English, and Doug Kozlowski will help us make sure that it is understandable. We'll Dougitize it, yes, sir.
We'll come up with some phrase. Commissioner Schnell.
You may love options. I'm really nervous about it. I like options too, but I'm nervous about options because the only way you can make a good choice is by knowing what you're choosing. And again, it all goes back to education. And this is so new, and I think a lot of what other people have said, everybody gets so blasted many phone calls, half of which you don't either, if you have caller ID, don't answer because you don't recognize the telephone number, or after, I want to talk to you about your electric rates, you're down. So I think the more education and the more information that we can get out in Doug's plain English, the better off we're going to be, and really alert people as to when they may be seeing this information, so that when you get something from, Consolidated or whatever the energy company is, people will look at it as opposed to tossing it. Because I'm really concerned that, people may not understand this enough to make the choice that's best for them. And I think ultimately it's our responsibility to make sure that they have that education to make the choice that is good for them.
Will do.
Okay.
How about choose your power savings? We'll start with that.
Yeah. Some attention getting, something that they'll actually open the envelope. So,
Power to the people, choose your savings. We'll work something out by the end of the night. Other questions or comments from the council?
I
Sure,
had one more,
Mr.
sorry.
Rankin.
So I had asked you about if you have your own, if you've already gone out and done your energy contract, which we have at our house, we're not eligible to participate, so we don't have to opt out, right?
Correct, that is correct. You do
And
not-
then what if our contract expires before that 18-month or 12-month period? How do we get in with
Right.
the role?
There's two ways that you could get into the program. The first is if your contract expires within the first 60 days of our program, you would be allowed to join at the same terms. Then after that, it would be up to the supplier to determine, it would be the supplier's discretion whether it were the same terms or not, depending on their ability to provide that rate at that time. But we would definitely talk to the supplier and discuss that further before we enter into a contract.
We could actually include that as part of the contract if we insist upon it.
Right now,
It might
it's,
affect the overall parameters of
Correct.
the arrangement, but
Right now it is in-
anything's negotiable.
right now it is in the plan of governance as Allison has described it. 60 days, free look, you're in if you want to be in that first 60 days. After that, it's at the discretion of the supplier.
And that's because it's a commodity and it can go up or down.
Fluctuate.
Well, sure,
So-
because if you had too many people jumping, then it changes, I get that, it changes the analysis, but it's something we can talk about in the negotiation phase.
Well, I guess what I was thinking about is how are people going to know what they're supposed to do? So we'll maybe have information
Okay,
on the website.
sure, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I suspect that once some of the information gets out, that there will be many more questions, and
And more
that will be one of them, and then there will be more answers to questions. Question I had is going back to renewable energy and green energy, because I know when we first started talking about electrical aggregation in advance of the referendum, we received correspondence from a number of groups and organizations, individuals, encouraging us to make sure that there was some sort of renewable or green energy option in whatever mix we ended up deciding to go with. So as I understand what we're currently proposing in terms of an RFP, a request for proposals, it would give us some options as to what kind of green energy or renewable energy we might want to make available to our residents.
That is correct.
And because I know that there's a cost to that, and so we'll see the menu, the options again, so we can decide what we think is best.
There are 5 options currently included in the plan of governance. Option 1, the minimum required amount of green energy under the state laws, which Allison pointed out is about 7 or 8%, right? 6%. And then 25% renewable, 50%, 75%, and 100%. We will receive preliminary pricing prior to June 5th, and the council will know what the value proposition is in buying different increments of green energy.
Sure, right, because there are shades of green.
Correct.
Any other questions or comments from the council at this stage? You're going to have another chance in a moment. Okay, hang tight, Allison. Any questions or comments from the audience with respect to this topic, electrical aggregation? Please come to the podium. Customary to give us your name and address, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Jeff Crane, 4825 Saratoga. I just picked up on something, this is a goodwill movement by the council, which is great. You had mentioned that some of the municipalities that are doing this have taken some of the savings and used it for other things. You said that, Mayor, you said that you don't plan on doing that at this time.
There's no proposal to do that.
Right.
I can't
Is there a
say-
guarantee that could be made that won't happen, or?
I don't believe there's any proposal by this council, the staff to do that right now, but I can't speak for 10 years from now. That's all I meant.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Manager Fieldman, village staff, fellow citizens. My name's Chris Sarix. I live at 1116 61st Street, and I'm here tonight in the capacity as Chairman Pro Tem of the Pierce Downers Heritage Alliance, and many of you know that is an organization here in the village that works toward the stewardship and preservation of our natural and cultural inheritance. We wanted to make a statement in favor of the proposal as it was posted in April 17th. And I think the additional information that we received this evening regarding the proposed intergovernmental agreement with Westmont is still consistent with what we have to say. So I'll read our statement, and then I'd like to turn it over to, I guess, Manager Fieldman, is that? Okay. The Pierce Downers Heritage Alliance, PDHA, is pleased that the village is using its authority under the Illinois Power Agency Act to pursue an aggregate electrical contract on behalf of Downers Grove customers. The village now appears to be taking an independent course rather than joining a consortium of jurisdictions. That doesn't mean the partnership that was discussed, but the multiple jurisdictions without concern there. We note that this does allow greater control on the village's part to set terms and conditions of the arrangement as reflected in the April 17, 2012 draft electrical aggregation plan of operation. As the plan is finalized and implemented, PDHA urges the village to bear in mind the considerable environmental impacts of electrical generation and the potential for reducing environmental impact through appropriate action. In particular, we do support inclusion of the 25%, 50%, and 100% renewable and renewable energy credit supported power mix options that were included in the RFP terms section 5.B.2 of the draft operations plan. We recommend expanding the treatment of efficiency and conservation measures. Currently, the draft operations plan provides in section 8.A that the discretion of the village, at the discretion of the village, the electricity supplier will, quote, develop and implement a program to educate residential and small commercial retail aggregation members on the aggregation program as well as energy efficiency and conservation tools. I think this reflects Commissioner Snell's recommendation that we need to make sure the public understands and is educated about these issues. But we recommend adding another paragraph to Section 8 of the operations plan, providing that at the discretion of the village, the electrical supplier will implement active measures to promote energy efficiency and conservation. We note that measures such as incentive programs for high-efficiency lighting and appliances, insulation upgrades, and providing information about average neighborhood electricity consumption have been successful in reducing electrical use in other communities. And finally, we recommend continued involvement of the Environmental Concerns Commission in development and implementation of the operations plan and in the supplier selection process. And I believe the governance provisions that are in Section 3 of the proposed IGA with the Village of Westmont do not preclude that participation, whether with Belden Electric Supply or with the Village of Westmont directly. So as before, we support and encourage the village to pursue clean energy and conservation options that will provide the best overall benefit to village residents, including consideration of and promoting of new green energy jobs growth, improving the health and welfare of residents, and protecting our natural environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarek.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Akers.
Other questions or comments on this topic from members of the public? Good evening.
Good evening again. Tom LeCren, 545 Chicago Avenue. Sorry, I didn't do that the first time I was up here. I just have a suggestion, perhaps in the notification to village residents, that we use a village envelope, so it's identified as the village, you're getting it from the village, more likely to open that than you would be from the supplier. And in that information packet, perhaps a covering letter from either the manager or the mayor.
That's such a good idea that it's already in the plan of governance that it is required to use a village envelope, so village markings, basically.
Great minds think alike.
The other question I have is that we set the rules, but the actual operation of things like the opt-out program, et cetera, will be handled by the supplier. What happens if we have a problem? Who do we see? In other words, we can't go to the village because they're not doing it. They've set the rules, but
It would be the supplier, and the village would continue to act in the advocacy role that we currently act in with ComEd or any other supplier.
That said, though, in evaluating responses to our request for proposals, customer service and how a supplier responds to inquiries from residents when they have a problem will necessarily be something that we should very carefully and will very carefully weigh, because that is another component. You might save a lot of money, but if everybody has more headaches than it's worth saving another half a penny, that's another thing to weigh.
very good, thank you.
Good point. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Rick Crilly, 535 Wilson. Are there any additional administrative charges or miscellaneous charges that would come into the whole formula for rates?
No, the only charge that's on there in addition to the supply charge is a maximum of $10,000 for the village portion of the consulting services spread over all the participants, which is estimated at 60 cents per year per resident, 60 cents per year.
Okay.
And to clarify, that's not 60 additional cents per resident. We're not charging people 60 cents for the consultant.
Correct.
Let's just get that clear right now.
Correct. That is paid for through the rates and the
To the
consultant.
savings.
Right, correct.
Thank you.
Will ComEd be making a request also, since we know that their contract is up at a certain point, and they've been saying for years that we were locked into the higher rates, otherwise we would never have charged you that much? Would they be involved in making a proposal? Would they be invited to do that?
Go ahead.
No, the answer is no. And actually, if Jim Belden, the consultant, would like to answer that question more precisely, unless it's just plain old no, it's plain old no.
Can you be more precise?
And the point as far as everything coming out, somehow knowing this is the Downers Grove approved, because everyone knows how much mailing you get on the trains. It's on the posters, in the vestibules of the trains, call so-and-so. You talked about the percentage of green energy and that they would give different rates then based at the different percentages. What will your priority be? Will it be finding the lowest rate? Or is it going to be somewhere in between, 0 and 100% green energy? I mean, I would think you have to have some.
Sure. I don't think we have a benchmark as we sit here right now. I was only half kidding when I said there are shades of green. Obviously, this village and this community has embraced renewable, alternative, green energy. We can point to countless examples of that, particularly in the recent past. But of course, sometimes green comes at the cost of more green, and I think what we will do is responsibly weigh the options and try to balance savings with green and renewable energy and come up with something that's a reasonable balance. I don't think people would want us to be green at any cost, but I think that some responsible blend would be appropriate. We don't have the responses to the RFPs back just yet to know at what cost is green, but I would imagine could be some blend. But that will be another thing that we'll obviously want to hear from residents on once we have that information in front of us as to how much they're willing to invest in being green.
That's correct.
Mayor, if I could add to that?
Absolutely.
Allison, it's 6%, has to be in there right now per the state guidelines.
Excuse me, yes. That is correct. The current state standard for 2012 is 6%. It increases over time to 25%, I think, the next 10 or 15 years.
And our our Environmental Concerns Commission recommended a 25%
Correct.
mix of supply energy. So
Correct.
those are kind of the two of the numbers that we're using right now, or at least I am. We'll see when we get the proposals back where the financials line up with those numbers.
Yeah, obviously, if we could get 100% renewable energy for the same price as 6%, that's a no-brainer. I doubt that's probably not going to be what's going to be presented to us, but we'll see. And it does sound like at some point we'll be obligated to go to 25% over time, and there's a recommendation right now from one of our boards and commissions to jump that and get a head start on it and go to the 25% that eventually we'll be obligated to provide regardless, or at least have as part of our proposal regardless.
But that's the parameters we're going to decide on June 5th, whether
Right.
we're going to go for
Right.
the lowest price or if we're going to go for 25%.
Right, correct.
And
So
then-
once we see what the numbers are, we'll be in a better position to make a decision.
And I think the mix will depend, again, on the numbers, but if with 25 or 50 or whatever the amount of green is, if that number is not lower than what we're presently paying, then there is no savings to our residents. So there's a lot to be weighed and really to look at on the 5th of June.
That's correct.
Other questions or comments from the audience? Good evening.
Hi. Judy Roscoe, 6285 South Chase. I don't know if I'm asking questions ahead of time until the information does come out from the village, but Allison had talked about who's not eligible. Is there going to be some information that comes out as to, I mean, is it residents who are not eligible for specific things so that people don't even have to worry about opting or not?
Yes, there are ineligible resident groups that I'm sure Allison can expand on in terms of who falls within those categories.
I mean, it shows up there, but everything went by so quickly.
Sure.
You know, with all the explanations.
We'll pause on it and perhaps
Explain.
elaborate.
The first category, well, first of all, anyone who's included in these groups who would be then ineligible.
Commissioner
program-
Rankin, for example.
Yes.
Right,
yes.
right, because she picked a different one besides ComEd, apparently.
They would not be required to opt out. There's absolutely no action required on their part. And I would make sure, but I don't believe that they would receive an opt-out notice because they would not be in our list of people who would be included in the program. So the first group is someone who's currently under contract with an existing supplier like Commissioner Rankin. The second is a space heat customer. Those are people that have electricity that use electricity for their heat, and that is a rate that is subsidized by ComEd. It's lower currently, and while over time that subsidy may disappear, currently they still would save money by staying on the ComEd rate. The third is the hourly or real-time pricing. Those are for people that receive the rate. They're informed of the rate the night before, and they're able to choose what time they want to run their dishwasher or their air conditioner, for example. Those people have a commitment to stay with ComEd for a year, so they would not be able to join our program at this point. And then I don't actually know that much about free service or bundled hold, but I know it's another rate category that is not eligible for our program. So for example, in a non-revenue producing municipal facility, we receive a free supply, so we would not be included in that. And then finally, for eligible businesses, this is a recent change to the law. This reduces the number of businesses that we had originally anticipated would be included. It's a maximum of 15,000 kilowatt hours per year. And what we've heard is that this is about a business with about 7 or 8 employees, and there are not a lot of them. So it doesn't increase our number by very much. There are not many businesses that we could include.
Thank you. I have a few of them.
Sure.
If we lose electricity, as Downers Grove never does, and we go with the suggested carrier that Downers Grove tells us or suggests to us, and ComEd is giving us our bills, who do we call that we have an outage?
The actual service, the transmission of electricity through the transmission system will not change at all. It's still ComEd. The only thing that's changing is the pricing.
Okay.
The supply is still ComEd, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later tonight.
Okay. And when you send out information to the residents, will you be maybe formalizing kilowatts so people could look at their bill and say, okay, I pay so much money per kilowatt for what I'm getting through, say, ComEd, and then this is what we would be getting with the suggested ones? I don't know how specific you're going to be.
I'm sure that we would show comparisons in the same denominations, whatever the units of measure are.
And with this new company, would it be the ComEd, or would it be the new company that would possibly give us rebates for like new furnaces, air conditioners? Is that something that would be needed to?
That's a good question.
And Jim just told me the answer, Jim Belden, our consultant, the answer is ComEd would remain in charge of those programs.
Okay, so that would still be eligible. Okay. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. This is all part of the education process. Other questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to electrical aggregation? Good evening.
Good evening. Stacy Salmon, I'm in between houses, 4945 Highland, I'll give you. I came here because I wanted to thank you guys for kind of reconsidering a green renewable mix in this. I had kind of gotten the impression that when we started this that it was really just based on lowest price, so I do appreciate looking at that issue. And I came here kind of to bring to your attention where we are regionally with this issue. So last night, Evanston, they voted for their supplier and they went with 100% green. And they actually secured a rate lower than Highland Park, which went with a 7% renewable mix. So I don't know how they're getting these prices in, but I would encourage you to really be vocal about what we want, because I want the village to remember that the village is in charge with this. There's enough competition out there that you guys really are the decision makers. So that being said, I would also like consideration, and I don't know if this can even be crafted in, but possibly considering a class, like a class customer. So if somebody wanted to go cheapest, they could go cheapest. If somebody wanted to go maybe 50%, they could choose. So you might pay a different rate than your neighbor, but that was your choice to make. It might get more complicated than you want to get into, but the point here is that you guys really are in charge with the decisions that you're making on behalf of your residents. So when you're looking just at cost, and I do think, the gentleman who you spoke with at ComEd is accurate. The prices from ComEd are going to start matching our alternative suppliers at some point. So as a village, you want to look at what it is that what are you providing your residents? What value are you providing your residents? And I think that this provides a really unique opportunity to look at what scale of a purchasing class can do for considering renewable energy and what that can do. 10 communities have gone with 100% green. I know some people at Oak Park, they were very excited about our meeting, and they said, you're welcome to call any of them to talk about their experience. They actually did send out a flyer in the mail to, once they secured some rates, they sent out a flyer, a questionnaire, and their residents, which, we're not Oak Park, but they chose 100% renewable. So be a good vocal advocate for what your community is asking for, and keep in mind that you guys are in charge, and don't hesitate to ask questions about what other communities have gotten out of this, because there's some really good things happening regionally. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that information. That's very helpful, and all of that will go into the mix.
Mayor, based on what the young lady just mentioned about the 100%, could we find out what the pricing would be if we did 100% versus?
Yes.
Yeah.
We will know that
Options we'll get.
we'll know the relative difference of cost between all energy mixes on preliminary pricing.
And then, with what she was saying, class, I guess that would be segment or options, right? As we've been talking about, would that even be something?
I think that's actually something a little bit different, which we'll have to look at a little bit further as to whether or not you can have almost
Like a package.
subclasses.
Yeah,
Instead
there
of
you go.
being the entire village, you would have different subgroups within the village that would have different mixes of renewable energy for cost. I don't know necessarily if that's something that'll be available or not, but we'll keep that on the table.
Yeah, those are valid points, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Hillary Denk. I live at 433 Wilson Street. And I too want to thank you first for pursuing this on the referendum, and also for moving away from the large consortium with Will County and becoming more independent and representing our community. And I reviewed the agreement, and it's very comprehensive. I too have been watching this issue and have noticed that communities like Oak Brook, Oak Park, Evanston, and then a consortium of communities on the northwest suburbs have gone with 100% renewable, and they're seeing savings on the suppliers of up to 40% with 100% renewals and 20% total on their bills. And that, I think, is something our residents would value and would see as a good priority to look at. Certainly ComEd is going to be bringing down their prices with natural gas, like a glutton natural gas. We know all those prices are going to come down, even for our supplier that we may go with. So I think that's something to really strongly consider. When you think about the green efforts that we're doing already in our community, I think it is something that our community really values. And it does create jobs here in the region. If we go with more renewables, and there's a push for that among local communities, a lot of this green activity comes up from the bottom. It doesn't come from the state. It doesn't come even from the county. It comes up from communities like ours and many others in our region that are saying 100% renewables make sense. Even if you're doing the carbon credits, it does encourage these energy companies to look at adding more wind turbines, adding more other renewable building and infrastructure here in our area. And so it could lead to economic growth, which would be wonderful for our whole region. We held at the League of Women Voters recently a forum about the smart grid, and there is some considerable confusion about how energy is delivered and the difference between who delivers the energy and where the energy is being supplied from. And so I think that's an area where there needs to be a lot of public education, so people really understand you're still going to get your bill from ComEd. ComEd still provides the wires and, you know, the meters and all the infrastructure, and all we're looking at is the suppliers. And that's always been a separate part of the ComEd bill, but people don't really notice that. So I think that that is a really helpful thing to educate people, and even an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the great things that are going to be happening with the smart grid too. That's really going to help bring down our energy expenses overall. The one other thing that I just wanted to bring up is that, yes, you can individually purchase power from a supplier that has a large green mix or 100% green mix, but that purchasing power for an individual is much less than for the site, our village, or with Westmont. And so you really can't even compare those costs in many ways. So I think that you could do it individually, and that is an option for people. But those are the people who really are very committed to this issue and are willing to pay quite a bit more for their electricity if they're looking for that 100% mix. And that really, I don't think a lot of people really want to do that. They want the win-win. They want the green, and they want to save money. So we have a great opportunity to do that here, and I really appreciate that you're pursuing this, and hopefully we'll have some more input. I do have a question about public input. There's a lot of people who can't come to evening meetings. Is there an opportunity for people then to submit their written recommendations or questions from now until the 15th? Because it looks like you're going to vote on at least the the governance agreement on the 15th, correct?
Yes.
The answer to the second question is yes. The answer to your initial question of will there be opportunities for public input, yes.
Okay.
By multiple forms of media, anytime between now and then.
Okay, and who should they direct that information to? To commissioners, to the village manager? What's the best place to send that information?
All of the above. You can send it to the village manager. There's several places on our website that you can click any one of those email addresses and I will get them. So we'll take them from any source.
The favorite one seems to be mayor and council, which goes to the mayor and council and the village manager.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Other questions or comments from the audience as part of this public hearing on electrical aggregation? Good evening.
Good evening.
Dale Eman, 157 41st Street. In the spirit of fair disclosure, I should say that I am employed by Exelon, not ComEd, and I will not be speaking for or against the proposal just for appearance of potential conflict. But I do have two suggestions and comments. First, the 2-week opt-out window I think is too short. When we pay our bills, they usually say we should allow up to 5 days for the mail service to be delivered. I feel that 2 weeks is way too short. I happen to be in a fortunate situation, expect to be out of the country for 2 weeks, sometime between now and Labor Day. So I might not even be here to be able to do that. My gut tells me 30 days, but I understand the desire to move quickly on this, so I would suggest a compromise of 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks. The second one is, in response to some things people were saying, perhaps we should also consider an option of something on the neighborhood of 7 to 10% green in our request for proposal. I think that's about what is available as far as nationally, as far as green energy generation capability. So as I recall looking at the proposal, you were looking basically at 0, 25, 50, 75, and 100. There may also be a number somewhere in the vicinity of 7 to 10 that might also be a good option to include in the RFP. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And the notice provision is particularly practical observation, so thank you.
Isn't the lowest power mix 6%, right?
Yes.
State requires 6%, as Commissioner Newsted pointed out earlier. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Public comments on electrical aggregation, plan of operation and governance. Okay, that brings us back to final questions or comments from the village council on this item. Commissioner Newstat.
I'm going to agree with Mr. Lehman that window of opt-out time, if we could look at that and see what maybe other communities are doing with use our consultant, just to get some more information on that, I think would be a good idea.
Okay. And I doubt the additional week would materially change that.
I see a lot of heads nodding. I think we'll move forward on that.
Also, there's the ability to opt out through the internet. You could do it quicker. I mean, if you're out of town, almost everyone has, well, I shouldn't say almost everyone, lots of people carry computers, or at least smartphones, whatever they're called, so that you can access things, and perhaps if there were at least the ability to do that, it would be helpful to residents too.
There's probably an app for that.
I'm sure there is, I don't know. I still have an old-fashioned phone, but.
Yes, we will absolutely have, there will be an internet option and I believe a phone option as well. And in addition, we will let people know when the opt-out notices are being mailed so that they can prepare to receive them if that's what they're interested in doing.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Rankin?
Stacy Selman was asking about the individual choice, and that was an option that I was interested in hearing more about too. But in the council responses, you detailed this North Shore Electricity Aggregation Consortium. Can you tell us more about that? Or
Sure.
would you like me to?
Sure. There are 8 communities in the on the North Shore that formed a consortium. One of the communities, Lake Forest, elected to purchase 100% green energy. The other communities are allowing their residents to opt in for a green rate after the opt-out process is over. So they would, all of the residents and, well, all of the people who are members of their aggregation program will receive a postcard saying, would you like to sign up for additional green energy credits?
So there's an additional administrative cost and concern that we're looking into on that option.
Well, and then you also said that it would drive up the rates that we would receive from the different bidders, right?
It could quite possibly, because of the administrative costs of
Is
an
there any,
opt-out
is
and
there
an
any way,
opt-in.
to Commissioner Rankin's point, is there any way that we could at least ask in the RFP responses for perhaps that cost to be broken out so we at least know what it is? So if we decide that that's not an option, we know it because of the associated cost. I think that might be helpful in the decision-making process.
Yes, we can.
Again, lots of options. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Commissioner.
Okay, and I just wanted to just make a few final comments. You know, when we went to our residents to ask them if they wanted us to pursue electrical aggregation, we talked about lowering the price of electricity. And I understand and empathize with all the comments that we're hearing, but I think we really need to do what our residents asked us to do and lower the price of electricity. So when we're making choices, I'd like us all to consider that and not be swayed necessarily by, well, we all have our own personal choices, but I think that's important, and I know that's how I'm going to vote.
Right, and if I'm understanding you correctly, you're talking about the balance that we're going to try to achieve between saving on electrical, generating savings for our residents on electrical power, which was the whole purpose behind this, and also respecting and embracing the options that might be available for renewable and green energy. If we can do both, obviously that would be a no-brainer.
We can do both, great.
That's going to be the balance that we're going to have to achieve, but we don't have that information in front of us tonight, but we will, and we'll have that discussion, and everyone will be able to listen and weigh in on that as well. But I understand your point. Other questions or comments? Sure.
I just want to thank staff. Allison's done a great job, Enza's done a great job, Dave's done a great job. But I think staff has done a really good, everyone else in staff has done a great job. But no, we talked today about this. This is an educational process for us as a council too. And, you know, staff obviously are the experts in this, but we need to understand it, and our residents need to understand it. And the more information you give us in a way that we can understand it, the better off we are, and I think you've done a great job of doing that.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
I just wanted to compliment everyone on a job well done, Allison. Thank you.
Ditto, I did have,
I think that's the first.
That is the first.
Never had staff applauded.
I think we'll mark down the date and time. Receive applause.
You just set the bar higher. We always seem to do that here.
I actually had a question which doesn't require answering tonight, but it's one that, as we discuss the renewable energy, green energy options that we'll be considering, I think becomes important, and that is, especially going back to the bathtub analogy, since we're going to have potentially multiple faucets filling this bathtub, and as it drains, we don't know from which faucet the energy came. Some might be renewable, some might not be. The question I have is, how is that audited so that as a community, if we actually end up paying, or it's not going to be paying more, we'll be saving less in order to invest in and embrace green energy, how is it as a community that we can audit and satisfy ourselves that those sources of renewable energy are in fact sources of renewable energy? And I assume that there are reports generated and whatnot, but how do communities satisfy themselves that they are actually getting what they're paying for, or, as I should say, saving less in order to support renewable and green energy?
We do, in our plan of governance, require a report from the supplier. However, I would have to find out a little bit more and get back to you on the specifics of how those are certified.
Sure, and I didn't anticipate an answer tonight, but going forward, I would want a little bit more than, oh, here's our fancy glossy spreadsheet, look at all these nice numbers. How do we assure ourselves that that's actually happening? There's some independent audits that are done. I don't imagine we're going to have our own independent auditor go out to some transmission facility in Waco, Texas, but I'm sure that there are ways in which these things can be verified, and that would obviously, I think, be important, that if we're giving up some savings, that we're truly getting what it is that we bargained for. That was the only other question I had.
Just in light of that, when we were National League of Cities, and I was at the I think it was Gilbert, they have a facility there where they were actually selling their solar power to Integris in Wisconsin because they were using it as credits for Integris. So they were getting so much credit towards their electric bills, and they were selling their solar panel power to a firm in Wisconsin. So you're right. I think there's got to be reports out that they did actually get a report of how much they sold and how much they were credited for, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure then it goes into a mix, which then allows them to say they have so much solar or green renewable energy. But I don't know exactly. We actually saw the production there, which gave us an idea of how much they were actually selling to Wisconsin. But I don't know how you then bring it down to how Downers Grove is taking a 0.25% of that, or whatever it may be. So,
well, it's not so much the percentages that I'm concerned about, is that some verification that the source, whatever it is in fact meeting the criteria for renewable or green energy that we think it is.
Right, I agree.
Well, as I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you buy a renewable energy credit, it gets assigned a number so that you know that it's official. It doesn't just go into the mix and go missing. Am I right? Do I understand that properly?
We'll provide more information on that.
Yeah, that's,
We'll look into it.
they expect to have it Spanish Inquisition tonight. Thank you. Any other questions or final questions or comments from members of the council? Hearing none, I will then declare this public hearing adjourned. Not the meeting, but the public hearing is adjourned. Thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone who weighed in with comments and questions. I think all those were very helpful to the overall discussion, and as mentioned, this is in fact part of the ongoing public education process for what is a new thing in Downers Grove. All right, that brings us to item 6 on our agenda, which is our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any of the items on the consent agenda, which are under item 6? And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I can count right, 8 items on the consent agenda. Any questions or comments on any of those items from any members of the audience? Hearing none, any questions or comments from any members of the Village Council with respect to the consent agenda items? Hearing none, roll call please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the consent agenda passes unanimously. It brings us to item 7 on our agenda, which is our active agenda. We have 2 items on our active agenda, A and B. First item, do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance designating planned development number 51 and authorize an auditorium and office building.
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance amending the comprehensive zoning ordinance of the Village of Downers Grove, Illinois, to designate the south side of 31st Street, approximately 1,281 feet west of Myers Road, land development number 51, and authorize construction of an auditorium and office building as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience on this item, which of course pertains to Midwestern University's main campus project, altering their final plan development and permitting construction of an auditorium and classroom building? Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments from any members of the Village Council? Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. We discussed this last week. I just want to note that there are representatives from Midwestern here tonight and thank them for their continued investment in our community, and you guys do a great job, not only with your students and staff out there, but to help our community grow and prosper. Thank you.
Well said. Ditto.
Ditto.
Questions or comments from members of the Village Council on this item, which we did in fact discuss at length last week, or 2 weeks ago. Last meeting. Hearing none, roll call please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passes unanimously. Good luck on the project, as always. We look forward to seeing it completed.
Thank you very much.
That brings us to item 7B on our active agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending certain parking provisions in the downtown business district as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to downtown parking changes? No one's going to stand up and say there isn't enough of it? Any questions or comments from any members of the Village Council with respect to this item? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter also passes unanimously. That brings us to the end of our active agenda and brings us to item 8, which is our first reading, or our workshop portion of our meeting, where items are presented for the first time for discussion and deliberation and for a vote at a later point in time, but this action will not be taken tonight, at least not by way of vote. It's customary to turn the meeting over to Village Manager Fieldman at this point in time, who I suspect is going to then pass to Mr. Dave Reiner,
Who will talk about a special use permit at 2300 Wisconsin. Tom.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a special use ordinance that has been prepared to allow construction of 3 principal buildings on the property at 2300 Wisconsin Avenue, and we're looking for approval on the May 8th active agenda. Here is the approximate location of the property. It's a 5-acre property located in Ellsworth Business Park. It is zoned M1 Light Manufacturing, and the property is currently vacant. It is surrounded by light industrial and warehousing uses. This is an aerial of the property currently. You can see that it's vacant. The buildings that would be constructed in 2 phases, and let me just turn the property sideways here just so that I can overlay the plans. Those are where the 3 buildings would exist. That ultimately is the site plan. It would be constructed in 2 phases. Phase 1, which I'm showing here, would include Building 1, which is a smaller building, about 8,200 square feet. Building 2 is the larger building in the middle, about 43,000 square feet. There would be 118 parking spaces constructed, along with a stormwater detention pond in the rear of the property. Under Phase 2, there would be a 3rd building constructed, shown to the left on the screen. That would be just short of 40,000 square feet, and an additional 29 parking spaces would be constructed, and what was a surface stormwater detention pond would now be underground in that location. This is obviously fairly schematic of the types of facilities that would be there, what the building would look like. The buildings would be 1-story tall with a maximum height of 21 feet 8 inches. Each building would consist of multiple tenant spaces with a minimum of 1,650 square feet and would be occupied by any combination of light industrial, office, or warehouse uses. The proposed development meets all requirements of the zoning ordinance, bulk characteristics, et cetera. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance. This particular illustration shows landscaped areas which in fact exceed the requirements laid out in the zoning ordinance. Plan Commission considered the petition at their April 2nd, 2012 meeting. There was no public input offered or received. And we found, or the Plan Commission found that the request met all of the standards of Section 28.1902 of the zoning ordinance, which is what the section that applies for approval of a special use. Plan Commission recommended approval unanimously. Staff concurs. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. J. Briner. Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from the Village Council? Commissioner Neustadt?
Thank you, Mayor. This one just came to me, Tom. Sorry I didn't get it in advance. These are like individual uses in there. They're not going to be loading docks?
Not loading dock per se, but there are garage doors.
So the question really is there enough room for truck traffic in that area?
Yeah, yes, in fact, we looked at it from a site circulation standpoint as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's all I had, Mayor.
Commissioner Rankin?
Do we restrict the usages to kind of help minimize the parking conflicts? Or, I'm sorry I didn't ask that either in advance, but I'm seeing it and I'm thinking about that.
Well, the parking tends to restrict itself. We did assume a certain combination of uses to estimate the parking that would be required. They are meeting those parking requirements. That's the standard approach with these kinds of facilities. As a site builds out and starts to get leased up, it's something that we tend to look at again. So there are periods along the way. Certainly prior to phase 2 is a great opportunity to say, hey, let's take a look at all of our assumptions for that matter for this property.
Okay, because I've gone to places like this that have bouncy houses and gymnastics places, and they end up getting just very overcrowded with the parking. So
The uses that are allowed here are the office, light industrial, and warehouse. That's what we're looking at.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Durkin?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I never asked this question, but in line with what Commissioner Rankin asked, these are spec buildings, right?
Correct.
And is this really the best use of the land for an industrial park with the number of buildings that we see out there? I mean, maybe that's not even our role up here.
I think the question is...
I don't even ask that question, but I figure, you know what the heck, I'm going to ask it because she brings up extremely valid. There are so many of those large buildings surrounding Downers Grove to the south of us along I-55 that have all these bounce towns in them and all these jumping things that last thing I want to do is see a building that's a spec, especially on a commercial property, just sit there with today's economy.
So a couple of thoughts. I think the question that's pertinent to the policy issue in front of the council is this proposal compliant with the zoning ordinance regulations and standards? And that's what we asked the Plan Commission to review. And they recommended approval based on compliance with the special use standards. The other question inherent in your line of thinking is, are the uses that we currently permit by right uses in our M1 district consistent with this type of building? You may recall we had this very conversation as part of our comprehensive plan a couple months ago. And I just want to make sure that maybe Tom could answer for us. Are those types of uses that the commissioners talked about, are they permitted in the M1 district, or are they special uses, or are they not permitted, those recreational uses?
Do you recall? And
I mean, I don't want to put anyone on the spot here.
Well, we can get an answer to that.
I mean, we can always get the answer back. I mean,
The problem is, we don't know what the uses are, so it's kind of a premature question.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that...
The question is really, what are the permitted uses?
In the M1 district,
Permitted
correct.
uses, those are the things that, under our current zoning ordinance, could take place or could exist within these buildings.
And then that really begs a question about, should we be amending the list of permitted uses in the M1 district as opposed to restricting uses in this one that meets the standards?
Because right now there is a zoning ordinance that exists that allows someone who's a landowner or someone who's purchasing land to look and see, under this zoning category, these are permitted uses within the Village of Downers Grove, and if you fall within one of those categories, it's a permitted use.
No, I understand, I guess, yeah.
Bottom line is, can you get us a list of?
We're going to pull it up right now here.
It's in the municipal code.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it is.
The applicant did do a market analysis that suggests that there is a demand for these smaller type units that are generally not provided here or in the surrounding area.
Right,
So.
and just before the bouncy house analogy, anecdote goes too far, no one says that there's actually going to be a bouncy house.
No, I'm not saying they're implying there is, by no means. I'm not saying that. I mean, so these are just office warehouse condos, like?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe them.
To Commissioner Durkin's point, there really isn't any 660 square foot units in the industrial park now. Most of them are larger, larger warehouse type uses. So this may just fit in, and those ones down south aren't in Downers Grove and have the different connectivity to the highways and industry that we have here. So
We'll provide the list of permitted uses in the M district for the next time this is considered.
You could probably pull it up right now.
We are.
We have it right here.
Well,
It's pretty extensive.
It's a long list.
It's a very long list.
basically, if they come in and want to do something that isn't on the approved list, they'd have to ask for another
Correct.
special use, so.
That's right.
Or they wouldn't be permitted at all.
Correct.
Right.
So we're correct. And this is located in the Ellsworth, I'm sorry, the Ellsworth Business Park.
The places I'm discussing are in business parks. It's little gymnastics gyms
They're going to be allowed. Those are allowed.
They are.
They're allowed.
Yes.
Right. Those are currently allowed, but again, don't even know if that's what.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
I guess I was just making sure that
No,
we could provide the.
I understood your point. I just think that it all of a sudden took on a life of its own, that's all.
Yeah.
And I blew it out. Full response.
Other questions or comments from the council on the item? Now, the only observations I'll make is it appears to me that it fits not only the zoning ordinance, but also the comprehensive plan, and to the extent the uses, they have to meet with our code. But we don't know what the uses are yet because it's not even built. So it appears to be entirely consistent with both our code and our comprehensive plan. Any other questions or comments? All right, very good, thank you.
And the final item,
8B.
the final item tonight on the first reading agenda is consideration of an ordinance amending our stormwater and floodplain ordinance. As Nan Newland comes to the podium, this is the much-discussed countywide ordinance update that we've been talking about for the last several months, and Nan is here to walk us through the highlights of this county ordinance that we are required to approve.
Good evening. Just for some background, in 1991, DuPage County enacted a countywide stormwater and floodplain ordinance that applies to all areas of the county, both incorporated and unincorporated, so for the village as well as the unincorporated areas. And the village administers the ordinance as a full waiver community. On April 24th, 2012, the county adopted a major update to this ordinance, and as Dave said, to comply with the county's new regulations, the village must adopt the revised ordinance. The updated ordinance retains the current flood protection levels that we currently have with our current ordinance. It clarifies the regulation for applicants. It places a greater emphasis and better addresses redevelopment projects. It provides for a higher level of water quality protection. It streamlines the permit submittal requirements, and it leaves in place the existing village amendments to the county-wide ordinance. The staff has been involved in the development of the updated county ordinance and participated on several committees with county staff and prepared necessary revisions to our stormwater and floodplain ordinance that you have before you tonight. The village's Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Committee reviewed this ordinance at their September 22nd meeting, as well as their April 12th meeting, where they unanimously recommended approval of the updated ordinance. In addition to the ordinance that you have before you tonight, there's also an administrative regulation that incorporates fees concerning the administration of the updated ordinance, which is included as well in your packet, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to DuPage County's brand-new stormwater ordinance? Please. Good evening once again.
Yes, and my name is Rick Crilley. I'm on the Oversight Committee, and I'm probably the only non-engineer person on it, and everyone else is so involved with it that it's a real good plan. I know they had put out prices for it, and I thought originally it was going to be based on the individual lot, the pricing, and the amount of permeable.
May I interrupt you, sir?
Yes.
Because I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the new stormwater utility that the Village of Downers Grove has
Yes.
adopted and will be implementing. This is, I can understand easily the
the
overlap.
plan itself,
This
yeah.
is this is DuPage County's stormwater ordinance. So this is an ordinance they've been working on for about a year and a half. It has to do with rules and regulations in terms of managing stormwater throughout the county as a full waiver community who implements our own stormwater enforcement, if you will. This has to do with the do's and don'ts. And basically, as a full waiver community, we pretty much have to adopt this ordinance. The stormwater utility is a different ordinance and a different program of implementation that will deal with how Downers Grove pays for the cost of maintaining, operating, and replacing its stormwater infrastructure. However, since you're here, if you have a question on that, we'll be happy to answer it because it's a workshop.
Yeah, I guess because I've seen where they've quoted the price that the individual homeowner would pay. But I haven't seen anything where it was based on lot size, buildings on the lot. So is it a
That is available, and Manager Fieldman's probably going to tell you exactly where.
The stormwater utility, which is not what's being considered here tonight, but under the stormwater utility, the amount somebody would pay per month is based on how much impervious area is on their lot. It's based on increments of 3,300 square feet of impervious area, and single-family residential properties would be grouped into 3 different tiers: small, medium, and large, and the fees would vary slightly among the categories. Additional information on pricing and the whole program is available on our front page of our website, and look for the link that says Stormwater Utility.
And if after visiting that link, if you have any other questions, please let us know. We'll be happy to. That also will be a topic of much education discussion as we go forward. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions or comments on DuPage County's new stormwater ordinance from any members of the audience? Questions from the council? Commissioner Waldeck.
I do support this, but a comment made in the presentation is that we must adopt this, and the mayor added that we should adopt it because we're full waiver. What happens if we decided not to adopt it? When we say we must, what happens if we don't?
Then we would be not in compliance with county regulations, and we would be subject to regulatory actions by the county up to and including we would not be able to operate the ordinance locally. We would lose our full waiver status.
We lose our full waiver or anything else?
Lots of bad things could happen, basically. We would not be in compliance.
Good enough. That's a technical term.
Always have to ask that question. What happens if we don't? Okay, thanks.
Other questions or comments from members of the council? I'll just add again, this has been a long process, and I've had the benefit of serving approximately the last year as a municipal representative on the DuPage County Stormwater Committee, which spent a lot of time on this ordinance and made a recommendation unanimously to the DuPage County Board for approval. And the DuPage County Board approved the ordinance on April 24th, and it was effective as of April 25th, which is why it's now being put out to various municipalities that are either full or partial waiver communities for adoption. If you're not either full or partial waiver, then you don't have to worry about it because you're not administrating a stormwater ordinance. But since we are a full waiver community and we administer the stormwater ordinance locally on behalf of DuPage County, we basically have to adopt it. Now, to your point, we could adopt restrictions that are tighter than DuPage County, but we have to be at least as restrictive as what's in the current ordinance. But that's a discussion for another time. I want to thank staff and the Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Commission members for the amount of time that they spent on this. This was a project that was supposed to, I think, take 6 months and ended up taking about a year and a half. There's been a ton of input from municipalities, from various stakeholders who care very deeply about stormwater management and Clean Water Act requirements. There have been a lot of changes and revisions and whatnot, where I think nothing's perfect, but it really reflects, I think, great improvement in the, over the ordinance that previously existed in DuPage County, and so many of us are welcoming this adoption. And I know that our Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Commission, as well as our Stormwater Administrator, had all weighed in earlier and were in support of the ordinance as it was recommended by the Stormwater Committee at the county level, then ultimately adopted by the DuPage County Board. So where we're at now is the first step is partial waiver and full waiver communities are adopting the ordinance. And then there will be training and information. I guess that's been a theme tonight, is education and training and information on things that are new. This is a new ordinance, and I'll jump ahead to one thing I was going to report out later, is that DuPage County staff reported at this morning's County Stormwater Committee meeting. They are beginning a training and education effort and have already scheduled to make presentations summarizing the changes in the new ordinance to the American Public Works Association and DuPage County's Department of Transportation. In coming months, DuPage County staff will develop and present specialized education seminars on the implementation of this ordinance. Many sessions will be specifically geared towards stormwater administrators, like our own, Karen Lang, and as well as municipal staff at both complete, partial, and non-waiver communities, as well as the general public. So there will be opportunities for anyone who's interested in understanding what has changed from the old ordinance to the new ordinance. There will be opportunities made available through the county for education, understanding, and if necessary, training on the topic. And most of those will be held free of charge at the DuPage County Government Complex in Wheaton and at other locations convenient to the attendees, which I suspect means that if enough people ask to get together and have a presentation, they'll probably come out and do one, which I don't know. Our community's pretty educated and interested in some of this stuff, so I bet you that we might actually have enough people out there that want to hear more about this. I know Troop 55 wants to hear a lot more. I can just tell
They're so excited.
That's all I had. And thank you for all the work from the Downers Grove perspective on that.
That ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item 9, which is the mayor's report. And one of the items that I had to report I just did, so I will go into the others. First item is we were talking about ComEd and how we were talking about electrical aggregation having to do with the price of electricity, whereas the delivery of electricity to businesses and residents is an entirely different story, and that responsibility will continue to reside with Commonwealth Edison. Going way back to last summer, with the severe weather we had that a number of us experienced extraordinary outages during that period of time. We had a town hall meeting in September. We brought in executives of Commonwealth Edison to try to figure out how we can enhance reliability of electrical service in Downers Grove. We've continued to stay on top of this issue and work with representatives of Commonwealth Edison to make sure that electrical service here in Downers Grove is the best that it can be, understanding that it is not something that we at the village actually operate ourselves, but we're working as best we can with ComEd to make sure our community has as much reliability as possible. I've been giving updates every week or so as to where we are at in terms of progress. Those updates are featured on, again, the village website for anyone who's interested in following along. This week's update is as follows. ComEd continues progress towards the final completion of the final equipment upgrades that were identified during the village's reliability review back in 2011 at that town hall meeting that I mentioned. These projects are scheduled to be completed towards the end of June 2012. All other equipment upgrade and tree trimming improvements that were promised by ComEd have been completed. So that's the good news. Not to say that that was the exhaustive list of things we would like them to do, but in terms of what they promised to do, it looks as though by the end of next month they will have completed those. Staff will update both the council, the public, and anyone else who's interested through the village website when these projects are complete. The last thing I want to mention on Commonwealth Edison is, just bear with me here a second. There is on April 11th, last month, Commonwealth Edison submitted a operating protocol for municipal coordination of emergency preparedness and response management, also known as the protocol, with the Illinois Commerce Commission, or the ICC. This protocol significantly affects municipalities. I know that Allison, who's all things electricity these days, will be presenting, perhaps even tonight, on parts of the protocol that affect the residents of Downers Grove as well as other municipalities and also affect our staffs. One of the things that this protocol includes is a new concept called a what's the acronym here again? A Joint Operating Committee, or a JOC. These JOCs will have certain responsibilities in instances of extraordinary outages of electrical service and impact municipalities as well as the staffing requirements for these JOCs, because they are not just staffed by Commonwealth Edison personnel, they're also required to be staffed by municipal personnel, which may or may not be a good idea, but this is what Commonwealth Edison is pursuing. There are some training sessions on these JOCs beginning later this month. There's one in Burr Ridge on May 9th at 9 a.m., which will go through the initial concept of the JOC, how it will be called, what the responsibilities of the municipal representatives are. I know that Allison will be attending, as well as Mary Scalzetti, so that we are better informed as to what the expectations are of this village. I know that we've had some issues with this protocol and the JOCs, but it has now been presented to the ICC, and we are dealing with it. So I don't know at what point in time you want to have Allison speak to it. Mr. Fieldman.
We could go right now, Mayor.
Well, then let me do one thing before we, no. Let me do one thing before, let's do it now. Let's do it now. I just don't want to forget the appointment. Don't let me forget. As long as we're on electricity, let's talk about electricity. Please, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I am here now to talk about the new protocol from ComEd that they have filed with the Illinois Commerce Commission that is going to be one of their operating procedures for 2012. I realize that I use protocol a lot, and I am going to try to use operating procedure a little more. So this year, ComEd introduced a new protocol for emergency response and planning. ComEd filed this protocol with the Illinois Commerce Commission, its regulating agency, for implementation and use this year. The new protocol has two overarching goals. First, it is intended to improve communication between ComEd and municipalities, and also between ComEd and its customers during major outage events. Second, it is intended to provide a guideline for planning for restoration of critical facilities before outages actually take place. So this new procedure has three major components. The first component centers around a joint operating center for municipalities and ComEd representatives during major outages. Second, ComEd is planning to improve the way that it communicates with its customers by expanding its telephone system and adding new technology to make it easier for customers to report outages. And finally, ComEd is improving the way that their annual report, which is the method that is used to tell us how their system performed for a given year. The Joint Operating Center is intended to be a physical office where ComEd can communicate directly with municipal representatives from a specific region, and it will be established only during major outage events. We're located in a region consisting of several communities in southern DuPage and Will County. To give you some perspective on the magnitude of the outage that would precede the establishment of this joint operating center, 36,000 customers would have to be affected for more than 3 hours in our region. This is equivalent to 2 Downers Grove, the number of customers in 2 of us. It's rare that this many customers would be affected by an outage, perhaps 3 or 4 times last year, but once or twice a year on average. And the purpose of the Joint Operating Center concept is to allow municipalities to have direct access to ComEd representatives to ensure that critical facilities are addressed as priorities during outages. And the goal is to make sure that municipalities are receiving accurate and timely information on restoration efforts. So in order for this procedure to function, ComEd has asked municipalities to compile a list of the critical facilities that should be addressed first in the event of a major outage. The goal is to make sure that places like senior centers or emergency operating centers aren't left at the bottom of the list while lower priority locations are restored. And while this list is pre-established, we will be able to change the priorities if conditions warrant. The next component is ComEd's communication with customers. ComEd has already increased the capacity of their call centers, and they have implemented a system for two-way text messages that customers can use to report outages and then receive information on restoration. And I would like to mention that residents can sign up for the text message system. It does require signing up with your account number on ComEd's website, and we have provided the link to that part of the ComEd website from our webpage. And finally, ComEd has committed to improving the performance data that they give to us each year. The report will still contain much of the same information. For example, it will still contain a list of the location, cause, and duration of each outage occurring in a given year, which is what we used to prepare our reliability report last year. However, this improvement comes with increased emphasis on providing municipalities with ComEd's system improvement plans. So instead of just providing minimal information on improvements to the worst performing circuits, as we get in the annual reports now, we will begin to receive more detailed tree trimming and smart grid implementation plans. And as I said, this goes into effect this year. They filed it with the ICC, which is their regulating agency, and we're beginning the implementation process.
Thank you. A couple of concerns that we've had about this joint operating center is, in my opinion, as well as it's shared by other municipalities, is that while there are certainly positive aspects of this, there are also some new obligations upon municipalities, and the two I'll just highlight is number one, as you can see, there's somewhat of a shifting of who has to make the decisions about who comes in terms of priorities on restoring power. And rather than ComEd having all that responsibility, now it's sort of kicked back to the municipalities, which can potentially turn out to be more of a shifting of blame, if you will, rather than taking and maintaining responsibility for a service that's provided. Not that I'm complaining. But that is a serious issue, because if the responsibility is somehow perceived as if shifted to the municipality, we don't control the infrastructure, we don't control the delivery system, and yet I can see that there might be instances where ComEd says, well, you know, your village is the one that came up with this priority list, go blame them. Yep. Well, that's fine and dandy, except we don't control the delivery mechanisms. The other issue is that these JOCs are expected to be staffed by municipal representatives, and there's a schedule about who has to go where and do what, and that could potentially take a critical key staff member of ours out of our community to go man a JOC, when we would, of course, expect them to be here. Responding to our own issues, and oftentimes, or you could see a situation where the most knowledgeable person would be the one out at the JOC instead of here at 801 Burlington Avenue dealing with our local issues. So there's, with some trepidation, do we look forward to it. I think this is somewhat of a mixed bag. I think there's some benefits to it, certainly, and I applaud the effort to try to improve communication and responsiveness. Don't get me wrong, but I also think there are some issues that potentially either shift responsibility or blame to municipalities, which can create some headaches for us. So we'll see where this goes. But part of the reason why I'd asked for Allison to explain this is I think our residents at least need to know what's coming, so that if we have another outage, and I hope we don't, like we did last year, some of what's going to happen is going to be driven by this new arrangement, not all of which we have control over. No, I'm off my soapbox now. And as long as were there any questions or comments from the council with respect to the JOC or the protocol? Commissioner Schnell?
I agree with everything that you said. In addition, I'm afraid that it's going to raise false expectations on the part of our residents. Mm-hmm. And not only, you know, are they going to think we're prioritizing what, you know, when their house should be restored or whatever, but just the idea, or at least this is the way this has been sold on the media, is this is a new way of better communication, of restoring power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there is an expectation there, when you hear that on the television, that things are necessarily going to be much, much better. And that may happen, but it may not happen. And my concern is false expectations. I think it would be beneficial if Allison's presentation, either verbally spoken or her slides, could be put on our webpage, so that residents could look at it, and then if there are any questions, they could email them to the manager or to Allison, to really get as much information out there to our residents as possible. So again, there are not false expectations raised in a time when tempers are flaring, ice is defrosting, refrigerators are going bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just a lot of worry and concern. And we heard last year from a woman who thought some business on Ogden was being restored before her home, and her power was being restored down. I think that's going to be a lot of what people are going to think is happening, and games are being played, and why did the village say McDonald's should be put up before my house, or whatever it may be. So I think, you know, the more education we can put out there, so that people's expectations are not raised and that the truth is out there, the better off we're going to be.
We will do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, yes, I can hear the phone call now. Wait a minute, they got the smart grid, they got the protocol, why is my power out?
Yeah, now, there's going to be all sorts of things, and,
Why is my bill higher?
yeah.
It's going
90
up 90 cents.
90 cents.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, all right, again, off the soapbox. Any other questions or comments of Allison with respect to the ComEd protocol for emergency preparedness and response management? Hearing none, thank you. All right, thank you very much, Allison, that's greatly appreciated. I think we may need to talk about this again as
Summer goes on?
yeah, the peak outage opportunities come closer. All right, well, the next item I have on the mayor's report is an appointment to a vacancy, unexpired term, I should say, on the Environmental Concerns Commission. And as is customary, I'll ask the village clerk to please read the appointment, and then we'll get a motion in a second, and then I will add a comment. If there's any questions or whatnot, we can take them up at that time. So if I could so impose upon you.
A resolution appointing Liz Palozzo to the Environmental Concerns Commission. Whereas Mayor Tully has appointed Liz Palozzo to the Environmental Concerns Commission, now therefore be it resolved that the Village Council of the Village of Downers Grove does hereby confirm the appointment of Liz Palozzo to the Environmental Concerns Commission for the balance of the vacated term expiring August 31, 2012.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to make that appointment?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the village? Well, why don't I make the comment first? So because I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Liz Palozzo, and then I'll take questions from either the audience or the village council. Liz could not be here tonight. She was, I believe, away on business, but we thank her for volunteering to serve. She's an exceptionally qualified person to be on the Environmental Concerns Commission, and I'll just briefly give you a couple of reasons why. She has a Bachelor's of Science, actually graduated with honors in environmental science from DePaul University, an outstanding university here in Chicago. Go Blue Demons. She also has a Master's of Science in environmental science from Indiana University. And in her professional career has served as a compliance inspector with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, has served as a wetlands project manager with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and is currently a wetland and environmental scientist with none other than the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So I thought that she would be a perfect addition to the Environmental Concerns Commission. Not the least of which is the word environmental shows up probably about 35 times in her resume. So we thank her for volunteering to serve. I think she'll be a great addition to the Environmental Concerns Commission, and will bring exceptional experience and expertise to that board, which is already an impressive collection of resident volunteers. So we thank her for her willingness to serve. And any questions from the council with respect to Ms. Palozzo's appointment? Any questions from any members of the audience with respect to the appointment?
Commissioner Walden.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner,
That's
please,
okay.
go ahead.
I'll get used to which way you nod your head first. No, I read the profile, as we should, and I do congratulate Ms. Palozzo on her impending appointment to the Environmental Concerns Commission, and I compliment the mayor on his work and his choice. I did receive some contacts about whether this was my nomination as liaison to the ECC, and I want everyone to know that this is the mayor's work, and I think he did a very fine job with it. In other terms, I was also received inquiries as to the previous nominee, and all I can say is that I myself have not received any emails, calls, or any communications from any of the four regarding why the previous nominee had not gone through. So I have not heard anything on that either. And it also, maybe at a later time, we can discuss whether or not they're the liaisons anymore to commissions and what those responsibilities are, since the mayor is now assuming back to several years ago, where the mayor did the interviewing and choosing and putting forth the nominations. So hopefully we can get something going on that process as well. I'm kind of disappointed that this process that we had didn't work. it enabled, whether you were part of a group or an independent, to have some input into the process. And we know that when it went in the hands of one individual several years ago, that it didn't turn out well, and I thought the process that came forward with the liaisons was an excellent suggestion. I wish we would have kept it. All it requires is that people do their homework, they do the vetting when they're supposed to, when they give their word, they keep their word, and also maybe have a little bit, a modicum of reciprocity. So anyway, if we at a future time could determine whether there are liaisons and what those responsibilities are, we should probably get into that. And I appreciate that. But anyway, I do congratulate the mayor on his choice and congratulate Ms. Peloso. I missed the part that she graduated from DePaul University, just another feather in the cap. So, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to clarify, this hasn't been a change. Actually, the way our municipal code works is that for a number of boards and commissions, the mayor is the person who appoints the individual, and it's a advice and consent to the council situation where the mayor makes the appointment and then the council has to confirm that appointment. So that's your check and balance that we're all familiar with throughout most forms of government. There have been different ways that mayors presently and in the past have utilized the input from commissioners with respect to appointments. Some have made their recommendations and then given the council an opportunity to vet those individuals themselves afterwards. There have been others who have just made the appointments and they deal with it at the council meeting. And this was simply one where I looked at the candidates who were interested, found this individual, Liz Peloso, to be exceptionally well qualified, made the recommendation a few weeks ago, I believe, so that everyone had an opportunity to speak with her, read whatever they wanted, investigate, do whatever due diligence they wanted, and then advise me if there were any objections. And there were no objections voiced, and therefore the item appears on the agenda, and we obviously have a motion and a second. So there's nothing odd about the process. In fact, it's sort of the way the process is described in our municipal code. Although, as I said, different people over time have utilized other resources to make recommendations. I believe there was even once upon a time when a mayor looked outside the village council for assistance in identifying or maybe no, I thought maybe I imagined that. Theoretically, you could even do that.
Yep.
But this was simply, my looking into it and identifying a very good candidate and making recommendations. So I appreciate everyone, apparent agreement on that point. And in terms of liaisons, to answer your question, I think we still have liaisons to all the different boards and commissions. As far as future appointments go, I think for now I like the way this worked, and it was relatively low drama, so maybe we'll continue with this for a while and see how it works out. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Thank you very much. The appointment has been approved, and we welcome Ms. Peloso to the Environmental Concerns Commission for the unexpired term. And she's already asked me when she's going to get her orientation package. She's eager to go and figure out what her roles are and responsibilities. So as we do with all our board and commission members, very much appreciate their willingness to serve the community. That's all I have on the mayor's report. That brings us to item 10, which is the manager's report.
One quick item. For the last couple of weeks, the council's been talking about changes to our community events policy. Well, it came to our attention that we technically don't have a policy. What the council actually approved was a report from the Community Events Commission. That has dictated our practices and procedures since that time. However, to make sure we're got all our I's dotted and T's crossed, we will be presenting a formal policy to the council, tentatively scheduled for May 15th. And a lot of the questions and comments that were raised during the last couple of weeks will be addressed in that formal policy. So just wanted to alert the council members that that's coming. And that ends. Oh, one last thing. Long-range financial planning will be taking place next week, next Tuesday, right after the council meeting in the committee room. And we've posted an updated report on our website today, and that is the same report we will be working from next week. And that ends my report.
Thank you very much. Item 11. Oh, Commissioner Waldeck, please.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I was assured by the village manager and village attorney that the language that I brought up and discussed at the last meeting would not be appearing. So I'm appreciative of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Brings us to item 11, Attorney's Report.
Thank you, Mayor. 3 items to present this evening. The first is an ordinance authorizing the aggregation of electrical load and adopting an electrical aggregation plan of operation and governance. An ordinance authorizing a special use to permit the construction of 3 principal buildings on a single lot at 2300 Wisconsin Avenue. And an ordinance adopting an amended stormwater and floodplain ordinance. All will appear on next week's agenda.
Thank you very much, Ms. Petrarca. That brings us to item 12, council member reports and new business. So we'll begin with Commissioner Durkin.
Thank you. I actually have a couple items that I wanted to bring out. One is a reminder that our Administrative Finance Committee meeting is going to be meeting next Monday, the 8th, at 6:30 in our committee room next door. So if anyone's interested, all are welcome, and the subject matter will be council, travel, and education.
That's correct.
So the other thing I wanted to highlight and point out was had the opportunity to represent the village and the mayor at the ASGE groundbreaking event that took place last Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock at their new, soon-to-be home, world headquarters, next to our Sarah Lee compound, along next door to the new, soon-to-be new, dental clinic that Midwestern University is building. And in attendance with me was Commissioners Neustadt and Rankin, along with Village Manager Dave Fieldman, Deputy Village Manager Mike Baker, and Community Development Tom DeBreiner. We also had Michael Casser from the EDC, along with Laura Crawford from the Chamber, and Greg Bedeloff from the Choose DuPage, who was actually instrumental way back when, several years ago, when that project was actually being presented and brought forward. And it's a great addition, will be definitely a great addition to our community. It was really well done, in my opinion. They not only had, I'd say, over 100 people, maybe closer to 200 people, but they utilized public transportation that was provided by Doubletree Hotel, and brought people back and forth from the Sarah Lee compound. I like to call it a compound for as long as they're going to be here, but to their building, and then they had a real nice reception with a champagne toast following. So just thank you to them for coming and choosing Downers Grove, and we welcome them. The other one, as we talk about Downers Grove and, all the good things we do here as a community and staff-wise, and today we witnessed one of our own getting an applause for a job well done with the electrical presentation. When I was in Springfield last week, I had the opportunity to be called out by our former management analyst, Jamie Bellongia, I hope I pronounced that right, and she came up to me and said hello, and took me a few seconds to remember her, because it's been a little bit.
See how quickly they forget?
Yeah, no, not at all, because when her name tag said, are you okay, said Montgomery, I didn't realize that she is now was just recently promoted to the Assistant Village Administrator for the Village of Montgomery. So you can see as we train them and bring them on, and as they move on, they move forward at the same time to bring in the Downers Grove way, quote unquote, to their new municipalities, because that we spent a few minutes talking about. So that's all I have, and I appreciate my time slot.
Thank you, and very much appreciated you stepping in for me and addressing the large crowd at the groundbreaking on Friday. Unfortunately, I could not attend. I was very disappointed, but I was in Denver on business and wasn't able to be there.
Well, you were well
thank you for
represented by all of us. So thank you,
as well for Commissioners Neustadt and Rankin for being there as well. Thank you, Commissioner Schnell.
I have nothing, and I apologize.
That's okay.
Apologize.
But that was insensitive of me. I should have skipped you and come back.
That's okay. I'll just sit here and cry.
Sorry. We'll give you another shot afterwards. Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. A great event coming up on Saturday, May 12th is the Downers Grove Junior Women's Club Local Celebrity Golf Outing. Of course, we'll be right here at the Downers Grove Golf Club. The event begins at 2:30 with a dinner around 6:30. You can register at www.dgjwc.org. It's a great event. They've got some great sponsors, including the Lemon Tree, Gatto's Restaurant, and Peter Babbage and Associates. So hope to see everybody out for that event. There are some foursomes still available and a lot of space left for dinner. So come on out and have a good round of golf. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rankin.
I just wanted to share that the Downers Grove Park District is supporting TV Turnoff Week this week.
If you go to www.dgparks.org, they have a whole list of free activities for people to do with their families, hikes and some classes and things. So if you'd like more information, head over to Downers Grove Park District's website.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Senior Home Sharing has a home that for seniors operating in just on Main Street near McCollum Park, and their Senior Home Sharing has 5 homes in the area, including an apartment building, and they will be having a gala on Thursday, May 3rd at Harry Carey's in Lombard. Promises to be a fabulous event. Joel Daly's going to be there. Some of you may remember him from the what they call it, Happy News back in the day, but it kind of set a standard for news anchoring to the modern day. Joel's also appeared in Downers Grove a number of times with his doing country music. He will be at the gala, and they will also have tickets available for trying to win tickets, excellent seating for the Crosstown Classic. That's not Downers North versus South, but rather the Cubs versus Sox. So it'll be an evening of Joel Daly, some tickets and chocolate and a great meal. If anyone's interested, please contact Senior Home Sharing. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Just 2 quick things for me, since I obviously have already reported out a great deal tonight. Number 1, I just want to make my personal appeal that the scouts from Troop 55 should probably receive 2 citizenship pins for having endured the entire meeting in the front row and at least as long as they could.
They almost made
learned
it.
a great deal about stormwater and electricity and whatnot. So that was actually impressive. And last, there are in fact only 50 days left, 50 days left until Rotary Grove Fest. Can't wait. And with that, I have nothing further, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.